And that's essential. I think we'll talk more about that next week, but it's really what you did in the first semester. So I want you to draw on the version of this class that you did in the first semester, all right? I'm going to ask you to kind of report on that in the next class. So we just have a picture of what a healthy culture looks like, a healthy person looks like. You need to have that sort of comprehensive picture of health, right? But what happens when you go to the doctor is, my health, something feels wrong, something feels off about my health. And so what the doctor is going to do is diagnose the problem. It's going to run you through a series of tests to diagnose what's gone wrong, right? So you need the diagnosis. And then what you do, once you diagnose the problem, then you'll get a set of practices or a set of, I'm going to call them practices because I think it's the philosophical term, but actually philosophers would use therapy here too, right? Therapy for the soul or therapy for the culture. It's a classic philosophical way of thinking about this. So you'll have practices or therapies, and this will be what you do to restore yourself back to health. Okay, so next week we'll talk about some practices. And I want you to develop some of your own too. And so in the capstone course, we'll do a lot more with practices. But I want you to kind of come up with some. The bulk of this course then is here, right? So first semester, you have a picture of what a healthy culture or healthy person looks like. Here, we're diagnosing, getting a series of techniques that'll help you diagnose. And then we'll talk some about practices, and then that will go on to capstone. Okay? Does that make sense so far? Mm-hmm. Any part of it that doesn't, we can. So, then what are your diagnostic tools? Well, first of all, we have the philosophical analysis. And that will include running it through the lens. Is this a modernism problem? Right? So one of the things you'll ask is, are we separating faith and reason, or public and private, or we're using science only to tell us what the truth is, or something like that. Okay, does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Or we'll do tribalism. You guys should be seeing tribalism a lot now, once we sort of identify that as a thing. And it can be a mix of all of it, right? Sometimes we're really modern, sometimes we're really tribal. And I think sorting that out is actually really important. We'll use, as I was talking about this in report, we'll use tribalism to pack the Supreme Court because we think the Supreme Court is kind of objective, right? It's a really weird circumstance. We want the Supreme Court to tell us what the Constitution means, but we're going to put in place people who we think we know already what the Constitution means, right? It's a weird circumstance, and it doesn't work. But it's a mix of tribalism and modernism. It has to do with structure, so which we'll talk about today. Okay, and then the second thing we want to look for is power dynamics, right? So when you're evaluating any sort of cultural circumstance, sorting out the power dynamics is essential. So how is power being used? How is power over being used? Who's the recipient of the power over, and who's the one exercising the power over? Right? Just it's pretty simple, but sorting that out is the key to this. And then you'll also want to ask about the corollary, which is violence. Sorting out who has power over is pretty easy. How they exercise that power then becomes really, really important. So are they using the threat of violence in some way? Are they using the power? What are they using the power for? To increase their tribe, to personal gain, something like that. And so sorting out in some detail how the power over is being exercised is going to be really important to this, especially as it correlates to violence. And what you're going to find is that there's always a correlation here, right? The threat of violence underlies every exercise of power over in some way. But violence can be physical violence, right? We exercise physical force. But it could also be losing your job, it could be.
Mentally.
Yeah, mentally, it could be just how you are perceived societally, right? I think one of the powerful moments in this podcast is when they talk about the stink.
Yes.
Right, but that's an exercise of power over.
That's true, and that's terrible.
Yeah, it is, but it's partly tribal, but it's partly, right, the threat of violence. Once you're in the system, then that's a kind of violence because you're now marked with something that really has nothing to do with you personally, but it's just an exercise of power.
Is it also like using the threat of violence to manipulate?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's,
I mean, I'm just even thinking about like the politicians and stuff saying, oh, if we let those people in over the border, they're gonna do this and they're gonna do that. And it's not, that's violence
Yeah,
because
that's
it's,
absolutely
okay.
violence. Yeah, when Trump was talking about the rapists who are coming out from Central America. Or just recently, someone was asking about.
So fear is violence.
Yeah, in some congressional hearings, they were asking about, are you sure there's no MI5 in these people coming to the border? I don't even know what MI5 is, but it's just a way of manipulating, right, people. Yeah, violence is a big category, right? It's a mistake to limit violence simply to physical force. Violence can be emotional, violence can be societal, violence can have all sorts of forms. And we know that because we know trauma doesn't just come from physical force, right? Trauma can be a big category too, and it's correlated to violence, which is correlated to power. Okay? All right, questions about that? That's a review. I feel like you're pretty good with that, but we can talk more about it if we need to. The key is that when you look at one of your stories from the podcast, that you filter it through that lens. And the questions you will ask is, just like a doctor, where's the power over here? How's it being exercised? What's the threat of violence? How is the person receiving that threat of violence? What are the implications of that, right? You just work your way through this kind of deep analysis of how that's working itself out.
Do we use just only one story line? Can we use like three?
You can do, yeah, I don't really care that much. You can use it as little as one, especially that there's a couple that go across. That are pretty strong, you can do that. But if you got like three that you see having the same kind of patterns or whatever, I think that's really effective too. I'm primarily interested in seeing you put this into practice.
even if we use one, and it's like 5 or 6 different directions you can go in with just one podcast. And each person is being intimidated and being put in a situation where you can consider being violence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And who has the power? Who's inflicting the power?
See?
Yeah.
In one podcast, you got all those different directions.
Once you have it as a diagnostic tool, it's really, really helpful for understanding what's actually happening. So you can say it's unfair. I mean, you can sort of look at it. I'm sure you all had a reaction like, this is really unfair. Well, yeah, it is, but we want to know why, right? So the symptom is it's unfair, right? You come to the doctor, I don't feel well. So this is really unfair. Okay, well, let's figure out why it is. And then once you have that diagnosis, then we can come up with some practices to help restore, right? The power dynamic, or what, right? So if you think it's power and violence that's the problem here, then we'll come up with some practices that will help you address the effects of the violence or the
Is
power.
that at the end of the paper that we're doing, or we're gonna really dig into that more?
That's my question.
We're gonna do more practices for capstone. If you can
Okay.
do some at the end of this paper, that's fine, but, but what I wanna see you do this, right?
It's a process.
Okay,
Process.
so I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
I'm asking the same question. So our focus on this paper is diagnostics, taking care of that part. We're gonna hit the practices toward the capstone, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
We'll do some next week,
okay.
but I just wanna show you how it works.
But our main focus will be doing the capstone.
What we've mostly done here in this class is this stuff.
Okay,
4 of the 5 weeks will be about this. We'll do a week on
And then you're
practices.
gonna add structures to the
Yeah.
diagnosis piece as well.
Yeah, so
Okay.
the other thing to do is structures. Which we'll do today.
And we're in class with you until the end of February, or until the
Next
end,
week is the last.
next week is our last class.
Yeah.
So-
We got a week and then the papers.
Papers
So
due
what
the
day
next,
is
we have
the
2 weeks
paper?
till the papers due.
The 25th. The paper due the 25th? Okay.
I don't hear that much.
We got a paper due?
Not in the mood.
Just need my thing, that's all.
Although I fuss about undergraduates not paying attention when stuff's due, and my kid was like on the phone, and I was like, "Is anything due?" She's like, I don't know, maybe. Let's go to class. Okay, well, at least you're going. Okay, is that working? Does that make sense? So we'll do structures today, and that's gonna be a whole, another set of diagnostic tools. And you can do both, you can do whichever one, sort of gets at the heart of the problem. Sometimes you do a full workup, you go to a doctor, and sometimes she'll be like, oh no, I think it's this thing, and we'll just focus on it. Do that. Okay? So, all right, let's move, and then I wanna do one more thing with this, but we'll move.